Hello, everybody. Welcome to Speed Force Media. My name is Derek, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to sit down and rank my 3 favorite Ant-Man movies in order from least favorite to my personal favorite. Please note that I am going to be getting into mild spoilers, so if you've not seen Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, this video is not for you just yet, so come back after you've seen the film. Also, these are just my opinions. These are my thoughts based off my personal experiences with these films. So, just so you know, my opinion might be a little bit different than yours. I'd love to hear your ranking down in the comments below. If you're a fan of Marvel, DC, or horror, then please consider subscribing to this channel or giving this video a like, as it really does help support us and reach more awesome listeners like you. With that down out of the way, let's get into it. Coming in last place is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Now, this is a movie that I do actually like. I don't hate this film, but I was seriously disappointed. I am a big fan of the first 2 Ant-Mans, not gonna lie. So when I went into this movie, I was hoping to get the most epic, the most dark, and the most emotional Ant-Man film. Based off of all the trailers, it seemed epic in story and in scope. And unfortunately, for those elements, it did not meet my standards. I thought the story overall was kind of weak. I thought that a lot of the comedy, although made me smile and made me chuckle, nothing made me really laugh hard or laugh out loud like in some of the scenes in the first 2 films. And although the action was pretty good and the CGI I thought was decent, nothing looked outstanding, nothing made my jaw hit the floor like seeing the Quantum Realm for the first time. I thought that this movie was an entertaining blockbuster, I really do. And I will go back and watch it more times, and maybe with further viewings this movie will maybe move up a little bit or maybe even move down. Right now I think it's tied for the lowest rated MCU film on Rotten Tomatoes, so take that for what it is. But the one thing I will say about this film is that it does have the strongest villain of all of the 3 Ant-Man movies, and I do think that the third act really gave some time to shine for Ant-Man. The Wasp didn't get as much time to shine in this movie, although the scenes that she did have, especially towards the end, saving Scott, I really loved a lot of this movie, but a lot of it left me a little disappointed and left me a little cringy, especially MODOK. Let's not even start talking about MODOK. And although I think it wasn't the worst start possible for Phase 5 of the MCU, and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania certainly has a lot of things that I love about it a lot more than some of the projects in Phase 4 of Marvel. But if we're comparing them to the previous 2 Ant-Man movies, I gotta say it's my 3rd favorite. Coming in at the number 2 spot, which will inevitably reveal my number 1 spot, but I am still going to talk about my number 2 spot, is Ant-Man and the Wasp. Now, Ant-Man and the Wasp, not quite as strong of a sequel as the first for a couple of reasons for me. Number 1 is the fact that it is a sequel and that this is not the first time we're being introduced to this character and these powers. We've seen other characters in comics and animation be able to shrink down into smaller versions of themselves, but on the big screen in live action, this wasn't the first time. So there was something a little bit missing from maybe the awe and wonder that had in the first film. Some of the humor, it does seem like they took up a notch with the amount of humor, and with every Marvel movie, every MCU project for me personally, the Marvel humor is hit or miss, and when it hits more, then I tend to lean more positive than when it misses more. Like Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, there was a lot of humor in Ant-Man and the Wasp that made me smile, that made me chuckle, and there were a few different scenes that did make me laugh hard, especially when Scott is in the school and he's wearing that old Ant-Man suit and it's malfunctioning, so he's going all these weird sizes. He's not super big, but he is getting bigger, and then when he tries to go small, he's not going nearly as small as he wants to be. He's like the size of a toddler, running through the school in his hoodie. And then, of course, Hank Pym asks if he wants some string cheese in a juice box. I absolutely loved it. Not to mention, you actually get Luis and Co. in this movie. Kurt, Dave, Luis. I absolutely love them. They didn't get really anything super special in this movie. It did seem like they were a little in it a little bit more than the first film, which makes this movie feel a little more fun than the first Ant-Man. And I certainly do think it is actually funnier than the first movie. I just felt like some about the stakes with Ava, the main villain of this film, although I thought her powers were super cool, and I thought her acting was decent, and I thought her character was really interesting, and I hope we get to see her again in the future. She wasn't as strong of a villain for me as Yellow Jacket, and we'll get into Yellow Jacket in the next part. But Ant-Man and the Wasp I thought was a really fun film. It delivered in everything I was looking for. Not my top 10 MCU films, not my top 10 comic book movies, but a super fun time with the family. A lot of laughs, a lot of good action. And I thought Hope's character was done really well in this movie, where she's really pissed at Paul Rudd and Scott Lang, I should say, for ditching her and going to fight with Captain America at the airport in Civil War. And I was wondering if they were going to reference that or going to just kind of brush it off just so that Ant-Man and the Wasp can happen and not have any ramifications for that film. But I really liked the fact that he was under house arrest for that. I liked that his relationship between him and Hope was a little fractured, not to mention, of course, the relationship between Ant-Man, Scott Lang, and Cassie. I think Cassie, the younger Cassie actress, was just so charming, so lovable, and what else can I say? I loved this movie. Not great, not perfect, but a super fun time. Which brings me to number 1, Ant-Man. I mean, what can I say? Paul Rudd is a hilarious, charismatic, charming dude, and he rocks this role. I never would have thought that Paul Rudd would ever show up in a comic book movie property. I just figured that he was too much of a comedic actor, maybe, kind of like Owen Wilson. Who would have ever thought Owen Wilson would be such a big character in a low-key TV series? But we had a great introduction to Scott, who's a criminal who's trying to get his daughter back. He's a good guy who's just gotten into trouble over the years and is trying to stay out of trouble, but also needs money. So push comes to shove, he's got to do what he's got to do. He's never really hurt anybody. He's not a violent criminal by any means, so he's an easily likable dude. This is, of course, our introduction to Michael Douglas and Hank Pym. And although we didn't get to see Janet and the Quantum Realm as much as we did in Ant-Man and the Wasp, which those things I really loved about that movie, but this film was a little bit more grounded, not Christopher Nolan level grounded, but a lot more grounded than Quantumania and even Ant-Man and the Wasp, where it was really just a heist movie set in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is one of the things that I still really love about the MCU, is when we were able to dive into these other genres and pull simple little elements from those genres, whereas Captain America, Winter Soldier, political thriller, Ant-Man, heist movie. Just little elements like that to be taken from other genres and put into the comic book movie genre keeps the comic book movie genre feeling fresh and kept this movie feeling fresh for me. Super funny, not Deadpool level humor, of course not. It is more kid friendly in all three of these films, in all of the MCU really. But that doesn't mean I had less of a good time or less of a fun time. I thought Darren Cross, I liked him a lot more in this the first Ant-Man than in Quantumania. Not a big fan of MODOK, or at least that interpretation. But Yellow Jacket as a villain, I think, was a good representation of the early villains in the MCU, Loki notwithstanding. I think that the villains were there more for plot devices, kind of like more service to the story. Just have a villain who's there to be serviceable. That way the heroes and the side characters really get the spotlight and really get their time to shine. And I remember in the early MCU days, one of my biggest criticisms of the MCU was their villains, in fact. I just thought that they were decent, but not great, not nearly as great as some of DC's villains, like the Joker or Zod. But I did think that Darren Cross was a serviceable villain, and not to mention the third act fight where they're in Cassie's room, they're fighting on a toy train set. I thought it added humor, and yet I still felt a sense of tension. Regardless of how funny the movie was, no matter how many comedic jokes were placed in there, I was pulling for Scott Lang in this movie and his team the entire time, and not 1 second was I uninvested. But hey, those are just my thoughts on these movies. I'm a big fan. I'm not the world's biggest Ant-Man fan by any means. I don't think that any of these movies are necessarily top 10 MCU, just because we've had so much great MCU content. But maybe with time, one of these films could sneak into my top 10 spot. But what do you guys think of the Ant-Man franchise? Are you a fan of any of these films? And if you are, how would you personally rank them? Just remember, these are just my thoughts and opinions based off my own theater experiences, based off of my own life experiences, and your guys' life experiences, theater experiences are clearly, obviously going to be different. So I'd love to hear your ranking. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Whatever they are, let us know in the comments below. And if you are interested in Marvel or DC, please consider subscribing or giving this video a like, because it really does help support us. That will do it. My name is Derek. Thank you so much for watching this video. And until next time, see you later.
Hi, I'm Scott.
Did he just say, hi, I'm Scott?